again, and welcome to the Author Roundup. This special segment of the Book Connection Show showcases emerging indie authors who join us for a discussion of their newly published books. Join us for a conversation with our next guest author. My name is Emma, your host for today's episode. Today I have with me Mark Rose. After a career as an elected official and executive in the nonprofit electric utility industry, Mark now spends his time consulting in public affairs and writing. His latest book is called Under the Pink Moon. Hi, Mark. How are you today?
Fine, thank you.
Thank you for being here. So your book was published at the end of last year, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And so it's called Under the Pink Moon. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Well, I've been dabbling with writing throughout my career for many years now, so I think this is really a just a compilation of thoughts and age and a whole bunch of other things. But I I've had a lifetime love affair with the desert mountains out in the Big Bend region of Texas.
Okay.
Um, and so all of that came together to write this volume under the pink moon is
Hmm.
literally based on what a pink moon is, which is traditionally the April month. It's not necessarily pink, but
Yeah.
it is at a time when it's the closest to the earth, and it's stunning in and of itself. So I just took off from there and saw what I could do.
Yeah. And so what inspired you to write and actually publish a book? Is this your first book?
It is,
Okay.
and I found that a bit of a daunting process, just in terms of even to
I'm
do it.
sure.
Is it
Yeah.
vain? I mean, I know we'll get to a little bit of that later,
Yeah.
uh, but the writings are, and particularly on this volume, and I've actually over the course of a couple of years have been writing what is two different volumes, and so I have a whole nother set of poems that I'm thinking
Hmm.
about also publishing. But part reflective of experiences that I've had in life,
Hmm.
not all of them pleasant, and many of them beautiful, and just trying to wrap that into a reflective piece that would give you a sense of what the earth and nature teaches us, but then also how we survive on our own and overcome and grow
Hmm.
all throughout our life.
Yeah. And so so yeah, your title is a very, cool title, Under the Pink Moon, which I love. So what does the pink moon symbolize for you, and how does it reflect a sort of, theme of transformation like your book has?
Well, it is in and of itself a symbol for renewal.
Hmm.
And it comes from the time when, in most places, winter is ending and spring is just beginning. Um, and I thought about that as I was, pulling this body of work together in terms of what did I think would best represent um, that. And if you spent much time in the desert, I think the great secret of the desert is night, and
Hmm.
the moon in the desert is just unlike any other
Hmm.
place in the world. So just that image, that thought, literally writing at a time that there was a pink moon, fairly
Hmm.
basic. Why don't I do that?
Yeah. And so are you from Texas, or do you live in
Yes.
Texas?
I am
Okay,
from
cool.
Texas, and I uh, spend my time mostly out here in the Trans-Pecos region in Alpine, but I also spend time in San Antonio as well.
Okay. And so how much in your book is the, landscapes um displayed in your book? How does that affect the voice and imagery and tone of your writing?
Well, I mean, what I've attempted to do with the volume is make you really feel like you are in the desert, that you really do understand uh, its beautiful complexity, that it isn't just about being hot and barren. There's
Yeah.
tremendous amount of life in the desert landscape if you go find it, if you want to find it. If you want to just be hot and scared and bored and tired and and say this is the most godforsaken place in the world, you can do
Yeah.
that. But if you'll dig just a little bit deeper, there's a tremendous amount of life and transformation that goes on. Just watching a desert landscape after one rain is in it of itself, a minor miracle. And so I wanted to give a strong sense of place,
Hmm.
and hope to do that through the imagery that I laid out, but then also write about what we as humans experience and
Hmm.
how those two connect.
Yeah. And so, so many of the poems explore how, pain and joy often exist side by side. Why was that important for you to show that, um, rather than treating them as opposites?
Probably because that's the way I feel like I've lived it.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there is quite a bit of personal reflection and personal experience, in this particular body of work.
Hmm.
But I also didn't want and hope it doesn't come across just me. Hey,
Yeah.
here's my story, but more in the vein of here are my experiences, and perhaps they relate to
Late.
you as well.
Yeah.
Uh, but if they don't, maybe you just will enjoy the imagery.
So how long have you enjoyed poetry and writing poetry?
Well, I so for over 6 decades, I've been a book collector, and I actively collect fiction and some biographies. And
Yeah.
out of that, I've read poetry. Back in 2008, just because I wanted to, actually went back to St. Edward's University there in Austin, as an adult, and got a master's degree, and as I say, a master's degree in bad poetry. But that was a good experience for me. And I think starting back then, I said, I want to do some writing. I want to see, if I can convey my thoughts in a meaningful way.
Hmm.
And that led me to thinking about uh, poetry first.
Hmm.
Uh, Now, there is a strong element of prose in my poetry, and I mean I understand that, and that's on purpose.
Hmm.
But I think to attempt to write poetry is so incredibly daunting. To
Hmm.
me, I think it's would be much easier to just sit, which I'm going to attempt to try, but to just sit down and put my thoughts on paper, or to tell a story, or to relate that way. But I find to do that through poetry to be a tremendous challenge, and really takes a lot of work
Hmm.
to be understood, but also be imaginative.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's so many different ways to write poetry and styles and
Hmm.
um using more words or less words to convey a point I think is very, difficult, and I admire people that, can do that. Um, so also we mentioned about like nature, nature plays a central role in, your poems. What is it about nature in general, do you think, that helps us better understand ourselves and our inner changes?
Watch the seasons. Watch the turn of a day.
Yeah, true.
Watch what actually happens. Be aware, be present.
Hmm.
Uh, you know, I learned a long time ago in my career working on some city type politics that most people experience a park or a national park or a state park or even a local park.
Hmm.
Most people experience that through the windshield of their car, just driving by. They don't get out, they don't
True.
experience,
Just
they
take a
see it.
picture,
They drive through the park, they take a picture of it.
then
Hey,
leave.
isn't that cool? That's one dimension of it, and there's a certain peace that comes from knowing that that's there and seeing that open space. But it's altogether different to live it. It's
Mhm.
altogether different to attempt to experience it. So you you can look at the cat claw, you can look at the cactus, you can look at the vegetation, and see the thorns and see the prickliness of it and knows what happens if you touch it. But you can also understand that that's all there for a reason. It's protective in nature. It's protecting a blossom. It's protecting new growth. It's surviving in a habitat in which everything is scarce. And so to be eaten is a part of your day. And so I think just to look at that interplay between uh, what's out in the landscape, and it does. Yeah, I think you can feel the same way in a forest. You can feel the same way in something other than the desert. I happen to focus on that, not entirely. I mean, the book does talk about it. It does showcase a transition of, me leaving my farm in Central Texas and
Mm,
moving out to where I always wanted to be in the desert landscape and some of the things behind it. So, I mean, there's beautiful imagery and lessons to be learned in nature, uh, and it's there for us to experience if we want to.
hmm. Yeah, it's very true. Um, so a little bit about your poems, suggest that renewal often comes from uncertainty or
Mhm.
worry. How do you personally find your way, back to hope, like when life feels like super heavy?
I think for me, lessons learned.
Mm.
If I'm a 98-year-old mother who still texts, uh,
Oh
trolls her
wow.
great grandchildren, calls me on her iPad,
Oh my God. That's
and
pretty advanced.
yeah, I
That's
mean
awesome.
it's stunning doing genealogical research on her computer at
Oh my gosh.
98, and so I think I've taken from her a lesson that, be a lifelong student,
Yeah.
you know, be present, grow and attempt to learn. Um, we are human. We make mistakes. We are failed. That
Mm-hmm.
can define us. But it also can just be an experience that we grow from. I think one of the things I've learned the hard way in life, and I try to reflect this in my writing, is when going through a trauma, when going through, especially if it's relationship based,
Mm-hmm.
the first person you have to forgive is yourself.
Right. Yeah.
We're all pretty good about, well, you need to do this and you need to do that and this,
Yeah.
but really coming to terms with my part in it, my role in it,
Oh yeah,
what
accountability.
what I did. And so just, I'm like so many others, I've just lived on the blunt end of mistakes and
Mm-hmm.
tried not to let them
Yeah.
kill me.
Yeah. It happens to us all. Yeah. Well, it seems that your poems also, you talk about you and your life and experiences that you've had, but also seem very universal. Were you thinking, were you writing primarily for yourself, or were you consciously thinking about, the reader and how it could relate to them and, everyday life, like we've talked about?
I I think both.
Yeah.
It's not I didn't want it to be a poetic memoir. I didn't want it to be, hey, let me tell you about, my divorce, or let me tell you about this, or let me tell you about that. I mean, it's in there, it's
Okay.
reflective,
Yeah.
but it was absolutely conscious to try to make it be
Yeah.
universal.
Hmm.
Uh, Otherwise, it would just be a boring, preachy, body of work, and I certainly didn't want to, convey that.
Hmm. Um, so how is your book laid out for readers that are or are not familiar with poetry? How many poems are there, or how did you go about, thinking of like the reader experience when writing your book?
So there's a progression of chapters or sections in it, and so they are a progression of events. I mean, you can take from that, you know, we're in this place where, for the example, we're in Central Texas. We're,
Mhm.
here's where we are. Here's the setting. And obviously this fella's going through a transition. He's leaving his farm and, and then there's a clear signal, about the desert and how the two relate. So I laid it out that way. In terms of
Mhm.
my, basic writing style, um, I I wanted it to be, I guess I would say I'm in the Mary Oliver school of poetry in that um, I I am literal
Mhm.
and I did try to find a voice that encouraged you to think, but maybe not have to completely interpret.
Okay. Like
I,
that.
I
Yeah.
I love all forms of poetry.
Mhm.
There's poetry that's beautiful just because of the way it's laid out. There's poetry that's provocative because you really have to think to try to follow it.
Mhm.
Um, but I guess for me, the voice that I wanted to show in the book is if you are a self-proclaimed hater of poetry, oh, I hated poetry. It's the worst thing I ever did in school. It doesn't make any that you could read my poems and take something from it and say, okay, I get that. Uh,
Yeah.
I
Like
get
it's
that.
not
I
hard
understand.
to
Yeah,
conceptualize.
I can relate to that.
Yeah.
Um, the one of the professional review that was done. Um, the way they described it was like having a conversation with an old friend. I'll take
Oh,
that. I'll
that's
take
nice.
that.
That's a good
I can't say
compliment
that that was my goal per se, but if that's the conclusion that
and
people reach, then
perspective.
great. I'll take that.
Yeah.
Um,
That's a good one. I like that.
but again, I love poetry that challenges folks,
Mhm.
but and I like to read that. I don't know that to the extent that I'm good at any of it remains to be seen, but I was most comfortable in attempting it this way. Now, I will
Mhm.
say some of the things that I'm writing now are even more universal and a little bit less prescriptive. I mean, there is a part of this book that is my story, but hopefully you can take from it things that relate to your experiences or to what
Mhm.
you might be going through and
Yeah.
see it that way.
Yeah. Um, do you have any favorite poets, or have you been inspired by any poetry or poets in your life?
Well, definitely Mary Oliver's writings are just phenomenal. Uh, and I guess I've tracked along, with the grades. Uh, you know, I, I don't have the patience or the talent to meter everything out like Frost did, but he seemed to do okay. But he seemed to do okay, you
Yeah.
know. Um, I've read a lot of Rumi. I mean, it's
Mhm.
phenomenal,
Mhm.
and you think, I mean, how can you be that relatable
Right.
centuries later.
Yeah.
Um, so it's a pretty wide berth of of poets for me. But then who doesn't like Bukowski? Uh,
Mhm.
and I tracked a lot of his writing in the past and just
Mhm.
that real sense of conveying. I mean, I'm in that bar, I'm talking to that guy, I'm talking to her. I mean,
Mhm.
Bukowski was just like a master at
Mhm.
that. So
Yeah.
that's a couple that come to mind.
Yeah. Some other themes in your poetry book is, romance and longing, which a lot of people can relate to. How does that connection influence the way you experience change and how other people can too that you tried to convey or that you wanted to convey in your book?
Well, I mean, some would say to love is to be desperate, you know.
Mhm.
So, just,
True.
72 years of life and things that I've done really poorly and where I've been, blessed to have other people come into my life and then just
Right.
experiencing loss with the people that I've grown up, whether it's the loss of a child or the loss of a marriage or the loss of a spouse. I mean, live long enough and you'll experience all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so for this particular work, the inspiration that I wanted to convey is all of that is going to happen. Life, you know, life is what it is, and as Hank Williams wrote, no matter how I struggle or strive, I'm never going to get out of this life alive.
Mm-hmm.
So there's those basic elements of it that we're all mortal. There's going to come an end to all of this. So
Mm-hmm.
how are we experiencing it, and how do we accept the things that are tragic or not pleasant or sad, but not let them define it. And I
Mm-hmm.
think one of the things I was hoping to reach by writing about the desert is clearly not having been the first person to ever think this and the first person to ever write about it. How do you convey it in a way that's just a little bit different,
Yeah.
hopefully not clichéic or overly prescriptive, uh, or moronic, but just I'm hoping that the desert scenes convey that
Yeah.
because it's you do see life in its starkest form when you're in a place, like a desert or deep in a dark forest or, you
Mm-hmm.
know, you know, taking in the beauty of, mountains. And I mean, nature is, if we let it, nature is what keeps us real,
Yeah, that's
if we
true.
let it.
Yeah. It's like that phrase, you should go touch grass or something. Have you ever
Yeah,
heard that?
yeah,
That's
yes,
what reminds me of.
right.
Um, so okay, well, yeah, I feel like a lot of things that have come up during this interview is just life lessons and also taking accountability, I feel like.
Hmm.
For things in your life, mistakes and obviously. Do you think writing has helped with that learning, life lessons in general, just like writing and or journaling, you could say just writing poetry in general. Do you think that type of exercise has helped you in general just with life?
Oh, certainly. I mean, it's you know a daunting task to say you're going to write anything
Yeah.
and subject yourself to criticism, and especially in you know the world of writing something and trying to get it published or trying to get it out there. I mean, for the movie stars, it's easy. They've got a built-in celebrity. For the folks who've, crashed through and become famous, they have a built-in audience. But to sit
Hmm.
down, regardless of your age, I mean, whether you're,
Yeah, true.
whether you're an aspiring writer at 22 or 72, it it's the same process, and
Hmm.
it's if it can be very challenging, and it was for me, it is for me reflective, uh,
Hmm.
again, to find that balance between uh, just boring everybody with your life story and taking from your life story some lessons that if one or two people read my writing and it means something to them and they take some inspiration or some
Yeah.
joy from it, then that's a
True.
success.
Yeah, of course. And so when a reader completes your book, when they close the book, what do you hope that they get from it, or what do you hope lingers with them after reading it?
Me too. I can do this.
Yeah.
I can do this. I relate to that.
Hmm.
Uh, yeah, I did. I screwed that up.
Hmm.
Or I am blessed. Um, and get out, experience. You know, look beyond the cat call, look beyond the cactus, and see what's really going on, and how it relates to us. But
Hmm.
even if they just read it and say, I mean, obviously you don't want them to hate it. You just go, oh my God, that's a dribble. But just the little bit of the feedback I've gotten, and I think what's made me feel really good about it, just sending out to a group of friends and family and all those things you do.
Hmm.
Many of those people are not folks who give a hoot about poetry. And as I mentioned earlier, some actually profess to, you know, they can't stand it. I hate poetry, blah, blah, blah,
Hmm.
all the traditional critiques. But to, text me back and said, I could relate to that. I got it.
Hmm.
I felt that.
Okay. Yeah.
That for me was validating.
Yeah. And so when did you start writing your book and how long did it take you to finish it?
So I've been writing these two collections of poems probably for, actively probably for about 2 years,
Hmm.
but many of these poems uh, I started actually when I had to do my thesis for a master's in
Hmm.
literature in the St. Edwards in Austin. Um, and, I wrote all that, did that, set it aside, lived a
Hmm.
couple of decades, got back to it when it started, when I really in earnest about a year and a half ago said, I'm going to start writing all these poems. And you go back and you look at something that you wrote 10 years ago, 10 months ago, and
Yeah.
you'll go, what was I thinking? Golly,
Yeah.
what is this? And so if I put I put that body of work up to what I actually published, it's it's apples and oranges in terms of style and
Hmm.
conciseness and what I wanted to convey, but the intent or the message behind it, was the same. So these two pieces of work that I have, on one hand, I could say took me 20 years to actively write, but in terms of the active, I'm going to do this and make it happen, it's been about a 2 year process.
Hmm. And how do you, as a poet, how do you find inspiration and how do you, when inspiration strikes, how do you get those words out and those thoughts out?
Notes on my iPhone,
Yeah, handy.
sometimes,
Yeah.
admittedly, sometimes while driving and being in places where I shouldn't be on my phone,
Yeah,
you
you don't
know.
want to forget it though.
But if something comes to me, I'll put it in notes.
Yeah.
One of the things that I learned in when I was going through my adult learning process, my educational process, was write it down. Just write it down.
Hmm.
Get it on paper. It doesn't matter how terrible it is. It doesn't matter if it's what you mean or what you want. Get
Hmm.
it down on paper. Just stream of consciousness, right? And so I would start with a theme,
Okay.
uh, and then just, you know, word vomit it out all over the page,
Hmm.
let it sit, go back to it. What was I thinking?
Yeah.
What do I really want to convey? And then when I felt like I had the central theme established, then work to layer in the imagery. So a lot,
Okay.
some,
Oh, okay.
so a couple of poems I might start with the imagery and layer in the message, but I think mostly I had the message and then layered in the imagery as part of the editing process, which changes things. And
Hmm.
I think the most fascinating part of writing to me is all the times that you end up where you never thought you would be. You start over
Hmm.
here and you end up with a poem that really isn't about that at all. Because what
Hmm.
came to you in the editing and the rewriting and the rewriting and the rewriting process was, no, I really think it should go, this
This
way.
direction. Hmm.
And I think for poetry, that's where it can become less about you. It might
Hmm.
start out with you, but then as you're writing it, you have the ability to put fiction in there. You have the ability to say, well, it could be this. That never happened
Yeah,
to
true.
me. I think I think the curse of all poets is, well, is that about me? you writing about me, or
Yeah.
is that about us, or is that about you? And a lot of times it's like, no, not really.
Yeah.
I just
Just
I started out here and ended up over there.
yeah.
Um, and then and to me another fascinating aspect, particularly about poetry, is you'll write out a poem and you'll have someone read it and you ask for their feedback. And you have no earthly idea how they took that from that point. Because
You're like, how did you get to that
yeah,
point
I
from here?
didn't like, okay,
Yeah.
not at all what I meant to convey, but yay for you.
Yeah.
So it's for you to interpret.
Yeah, true.
And I would say in the editing process, which is never ending. But in the editing process, that's where I really tried to focus on um, when do I need to make this a little bit less about me, a little bit more universal, more
Mhm.
about imagery. And so hopefully I have conveyed that. That's certainly been my goal.
Yeah. Yeah. So how did you know that your book was completed or finished and you wanted to send it off to a publisher? Was there a thought process behind it, or was it like, okay, I just need to send it, or how did you go about that?
Yeah, great question. And don't have a clear answer. I mean, one cute answer could be you just get tired and
Yeah.
stop and say,
You're
I
like,
just,
I physically
I,
can't do this anymore.
I can't do this anymore. It has to be done. Um, I think that you, for me, that was the editing process was as long as the writing process, and you're just tweaking
Mm,
words and you're reading it over and over again, and then you just kind of step back and say, I think I'm done here. I think I've conveyed my message.
hmm
Could I go back and rewrite that and make it better in my mind now? Absolutely. I don't, that's where the thing about the writing process is, and I don't know how the pros would think about this, but for me, it's almost like it's never over. It's never really finished. Like
Yeah.
I like after I published a little book and I went back and read it, I was like, oh, I could do that a little differently. Oh, I could change that, you know. But you can't, you're
Yeah.
done. Move
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
Um,
True.
and I'm just finishing up, which would be a second book of poems. And I will say, going through a second volume, it's made the stopping a little easier. In other
Okay.
words, I have
Yeah.
having done the first one and said, okay, I think that's a body of work. It's made a little bit easier for me to say I feel pretty good about where this one is, and
hmm
and maybe we're done here. I say that although I haven't finished it. I'm, I'm,
Yeah.
st- I'm still writing it, but it's um it's a never-ending story, as they say.
Yeah. What part of your poetry book was the most fun to write, or do you have a poem that is your favorite that you wrote?
It's bits and pieces
Okay.
of of everyone of every poem. And I know that sounds corny, but I mean it's really the truth. For me, I think it's more lines and imagery
Mm,
than like any one particular poem.
yeah. Okay.
Um, I mean, I have a couple of grief poems in there, and I like them, and they convey a message, and I'm proud of them.
hmm
But I wouldn't say, oh, that's my favorite poem in that book. But I know why I
hmm
put it in there, and I know what I wanted to convey about, that part of uh, life's experiences. There's a couple of poems that are true and therefore uh, a little, mean more to me. I mean, uh, Kitchen Table, for example, is a poem pretty close to truth, and the ending of an almost 30-year-old marriage. You've raised your kids, you've kind of grown up
hmm
together, and so for me, that poem was emotional to write. I don't know that others will take from that the same. Um, talking about the fear of that comes from leaving a relationship, whether it's
Hmm.
personal relationship or work, particularly work relationship, but particularly a personal one. Just that you can have all the feelings in the world. You can have all the anger in the world. You can have all of the excuses in the world. You can have all the reasons in the world. But when it comes to actually leaving, to actually doing something like that, uh, it's terrifying. And
Hmm.
so, I've tried to convey that. So for me, it's bits and pieces and lines from
Hmm.
every poem as opposed to, okay, that's my favorite poem.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And so I know your book is fresh, but and we talked about it a little bit, but what has been the nicest feedback or review you've received about your book so far, if you haven't
Well,
mentioned it?
there have been two professional critiques, and I'll be candid here. I mean, they say they're independent, but I don't know that they would anybody really say, "Wow, your book sucks. Go back and try it again."
Oh
You know,
gosh.
so just accepting that the my editor, because I did go through the process of getting it professionally edited,
Hmm.
wrote back to me and said, the imagery was stunning, and it made that review made me feel good. The
Yeah.
professional review, the independent review was validating for me, just in
Hmm.
terms of to say, um, the book is conversation. I'm paraphrasing, but the book is conversational, but not trite,
Hmm.
and that it's reminds me of, speaking with an old friend, and I'm like, okay, I get that,
Hmm.
um, and then to send it to, your family and friends, but I challenged myself to also send it to a lot of people who that I know, but had no idea that I was writing something.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and that's where I got, I gave you a book to so and so. They hate poetry, but they were like, I like this. This is relatable. I can
Yeah.
understand this.
That's awesome.
That was validating to me. Of course,
Hmm.
my mother liked it,
I was gonna ask, yeah. Oh, that's so
but
sweet.
and recognize all the mistakes of my life that were in it because they do that. Um, but it's been positive, and with a group of people that, like I said, they might not call you back up and say, "Hey, this is terrible." They just wouldn't say anything.
Yeah.
Uh, I mean, the one thing though, when you go back to school, like when I went back as an adult to get my master's, uh, one of the things that they absolutely teach you is rejection, because they
Mhm.
require you to send all your poems out to all these places where you're going to get rejected. And that was a very valuable experience for me,
Hmm.
um, to to not make all those cuts and to not be able to be published or to win that, poem competition. And it
Hmm.
makes you wonder, well, what are they looking for? What am I missing? I mean,
Yeah.
I think there are a lot of poets who hold their poem up to the published poem and say, well, why not me? What's the
Yeah.
difference? What's the
Yeah.
difference? And I don't think that we know in the writing process. And
Yeah.
maybe
Could be
that's
anything.
also where we should not be looking for our validation.
Hmm.
Um, so first and foremost, I had to be proud of it myself, just the way it looks and
Yeah.
the way it feels to read it. And
Hmm.
I am, I am. Um, And then, like I said, to purposely send it to some folks that like had no idea that you wrote poetry or that you would ever. I mean, when you've been a utility executive for most of your career, people don't really think of you as, you know, writing a book of poetry or doing something
Hmm.
like that. Um, and so that was validating as well.
Hmm. What about advice for a writer that's working on their first book or writing their first book? What advice would you have for a writer?
Bleed, baby, bleed. I mean, I'm get it on paper,
Yeah,
uh, and let the editing process resolve any issues that may surface. But the
afterwards.
hardest thing of all is just to get it on paper. And I would also say that and as someone who wants to write the world's greatest novel, somebody who wants to write the best biography,
Mm-hmm.
ought to try some poetry first.
Mm. Yeah.
Because someone asked me once, well, why are you trying to write poetry? And why don't you just write your thoughts down, write a memoir, or write essays? And I may get to that, but my answer is because I want to learn how to be a good writer.
Yeah.
And I
Good.
think if you can write a poem, if you can convey a novel in a poem, if you can convey a
Mm-hmm.
life experience in a poem, if you can convey a feeling, emotion, a scene in a poem, then you're establishing the foundation to be able to convey that even better in its longer forms, I think.
True. Yeah. Yeah. If you can convey something in fewer words, then that makes it more
Right.
accomplished. Yeah. Yeah. True.
And then the other thing that I would say is you're not writing for your audience, an audience. You're writing for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You know, um, the movie star gets to write a book of poetry and immediately be on the bestseller list.
Mm-hmm.
The movie, the established, you know, published author, you know, gets to publish the second, third, fourth, or fifth book, oftentimes based on, the success of the first. All of
Right.
those things happen to them. But for you, don't fall into the trap of trying to, mimic them. Write for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And whether it's fiction or nonfiction, whether it's reflective or just conjecture, it doesn't matter. Write for yourself. Be
Mm-hmm.
happy with what you wrote. Convey the meaning of what you wrote to your satisfaction. And
Mm-hmm.
then if it finds an audience, it will.
Mm-hmm.
And if it doesn't, well, at least you'll like it.
Yeah. True. What are your professional or personal goals for this year? I know that you mentioned that you were working on another book, and what other things
I,
do you have going on?
so I have two pieces of work that I've worked on for years. They,
Mm-hmm.
they don't directly relate at all, but I mean, they've all flowed from the same place.
Mm-hmm.
And so I will do something this next year with that second body of work. I'm still working on it. For this book, I just would for Under the Pink Moon, it's like every author who's self-published, just, how do you get it out there? How do you get it noticed? I mean,
Yeah.
um, you know, can it get some traction? I mean, you know, you don't get to determine that,
Mhm.
but that, and to me, maybe that's the hardest part of it. I mean, who doesn't want to write a
Yeah.
book and then it just take off?
Yeah.
But that's not the way things like that really happen. And so I'm having to wrap my brain around, um, you know, how do I get my word out there? And
Yeah.
I mean, look, if I'm sitting there tracking uh, Rumi on Instagram, or if Mary Oliver is popping up on Instagram, because I've clicked on it. If X is reading poetry on TikTok, none of that happened. Just happened. All of that was done, and so
Yeah.
I'm you know pushing myself a little bit to see how the old guy gets out there and
Yeah.
mainstreams his work. Uh,
Yeah.
and so that's my mission for this year with
Good.
Under the Pink Moon.
Okay. Awesome. Well, I think that's all the time we have for
Okay.
today. Is there anything else that you'd like to mention, Mark, or share with our audience about your book or yourself?
No, other than just to say, thank you for this time and thank
Yeah,
you for this interview.
of
And
course.
I hope that for anyone who, reads my book and reads my poetry, takes from it that you know, you can do this. We can do this.
Mhm.
Li-
Love that.
life is there to be lived. We don't find it, it'll find us and it'll define us. And it's really up for us to uh, stay a learner and
Yeah.
stay a liver and stay a lover. Stay a lover.
I love that. All right. Well, thank you so much,
You
Mark, for
bet.
being here and taking the time. And we wish you the best of luck with your book and all of the marketing and everything. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Take care.
Yeah. If you're listening and would like to purchase Under the Pink Moon, you can head to balboapress.com and find it there through our online bookstore. And also it's available on Amazon and Barnes& and Noble. So check it out there and leave Mark a really nice review if you pick it up and read it for yourself. Thank you so much and have a great day. I'll see you next time.